Waushara Community Church presents the Mixing Bowl Podcast.
Yeah, and I noticed you talked a little bit about there's maybe a teeter-totter of not a strict roadmap, but not nothing that Christ gives us for this walk. But as we're going through Acts right now in Rock, right, we just walked into Acts chapter 6, the creation of the deacons, and we're starting to see more structure arise, right? And we've been talking about this for a couple of years now, but the structure of leadership allows for unity.
It does.
Right, and this is really important as we are not just a couple people here. When we think collectively about discipleship, it requires some structure. It requires some foresight as to how we can collectively do this for the future to come, right? Because we don't want to just say this is a really great thing for now, but it is always a first and foremost thing that we tend to. And so as far as our leadership leading us here at the church, right, what is the direction that we are taking for discipleship as a church?
Yeah, I think there's a few things that you said that are really important, right? There's a loose structure that Jesus gives us, and I want to talk about that. There is a biblically given structure for the body of a local church. And I think this is probably another conversation down the road that we should have. But there is a movement within the body of Christians that there gets a group of people that say, hey, I don't really like what the church is doing. And to be honest, I'm not talking about WCC, but I'm talking about churches in general. Yeah. There is some truth to that. And so what they do is then they go off and like, hey, I've got this home church, right? And it could be really helpful and really grow them and really encourage them, and it could be really life-giving. But what often lacks in those spaces is the structure that God had given to us through deacons, through elders, through the body and life of the church. There's a missing component there, and that's a conversation for another day. Sure. But there is an aspect of the leadership of the church should be leading and guiding in a way that is helpful. And so I think that pertains, like as we are here at WCC, as we're looking forward to discipleship, we're going, okay, the elders, the four of us right now, have to be really, really engaged with what the Bible says. We have to be really engaged with what Jesus is calling us to do as a body, and then we have to pursue that. And so, one of the things is you look at what Jesus did. So Jesus gave a pattern for discipleship. Okay, so it's a really simple pattern. Yeah. It is not formulaic in the sense of like, okay, read through these books of the Bible, memorize this much scripture, right? It's not that. What it is Jesus gathered his followers up, and he taught. And he taught them, and he said, okay, here's what God has said in his word. Now let's go do that. So he taught them, then he showed them. Yeah. So then he came back after that, and he taught them again. But then he said, hey, I want you to go do this. So then they would go out and do it, and Jesus would go out with them, right? Then they would come back, and guess what? Jesus would teach them again. Sometimes it was corrective teaching. Sometimes it was encouraging teaching. Sometimes it was just more teaching. And then what would happen is Jesus would send them out by themselves. They would come back, and then, it'd be like, hey, we're reporting, here's what happened. And then Jesus would teach again, correcting, and so on and so forth. So there's this, I'm going to teach, and then I'm going to show you what I've taught. Okay? I'm going to teach, and then I'm going to send you and support you in that going, right? I'm going to be there with you when you're doing those things. And then I'm going to come back and I'm going to teach again. Yeah. And then I'm going to send you out and let you fail or do well, because the disciples did both. And then we're going to come back and talk about it again, and then we're going to kind of repeat that pattern. And you can, let's take a very mundane thing, right? You're teaching your kids how to do laundry or do the dishes, right? You explain, hey, it's really important that we do our laundry because our clothes will stink, or they're dirty, or they'll get ruined, or whatever, right? So you tell them that, and you take them downstairs and you sort. If you're probably a normal human being, you sort all your laundry. I like to just throw it all, as long as it's not towels, I throw it all in together. But, that's why I'm not allowed to do laundry. But anyways, you teach them, right? You show them, hey, this is how you do it. This is how you sort laundry. This is how you wash laundry. This is how you fold laundry. This is how you dry laundry, right? And then you say, okay, let's go do it together. You talk about and then as they make mistakes along that, you're talking about those things and you're encouraging them and you're showing them. And then eventually what happens? You have now a kid who can do his own laundry.
Yeah.
Right. And so, which is, you think is like a crazy thing. And maybe, I don't know how all of our families well enough in our church to know this.
Yeah.
I got to college. I can't remember if I was 18 or 19 when I went to college. But I got to college, and I remember going to the laundry room to do laundry, and I remember walking in, and there being kids standing there. His money was in the machine. His clothes were in the washer, and he was just staring at it. And I was like, what? I was like, I can come back. And he's like, and I was like, what's wrong? And he's like, I don't know how to wash my own clothes. And I was like, what?
Yeah.
And so there's, it's a conversation. Hey, his parent, he was the only child. His mom always did it for him. Yeah. Took all his clothes, washed them, folded them, put it away. All the way. And I was like, man, my mom's rule was if you're tall enough and strong enough to do it, you still have to start doing that chore.
Yeah.
So I had to wash my clothes probably since I was like 12.
Yeah.
And so it was like one of those things I was like, what? No one discipled him on how to do his laundry. Right. So then I sat there and taught a fellow freshman how to do his own laundry, which was fine. Right. I didn't have a problem doing that. I wasn't frustrated as parents that they did it. But that's the beauty of how we do discipleship. Right. Yeah. So the elders are really saying, okay, we're going to talk about it. It's going to be a lot of the conversation that we have. We're going to keep talking about it. We're going to keep presenting it. We're going to meet together as elders and we're going to pray about it and look for specific ways that we're going to do that. So one of those ways is having conversations with our leaders and having conversations with ministries and having conversations to say, okay, is this being a healthy part of what we're doing? Right. Mm-hmm. So the question is does this ministry, and this is a serious question we're asking as elders, does this ministry actually disciple people? That's a good gut check, right? If you want to have a gut check, is the things that I'm doing in my life discipling other people?
Yeah.
If the answer is no, I would encourage some prayer.
Yeah.
Right. So that's the conversations we're having, and we've started those in a few places. Right. So the first Tuesday of the month, the elders and the deacons are gathering, and we're praying together, and we've been doing that since I think May. Yeah. And one of the things that the elders decided to do in the time is say, hey, listen, this is a great opportunity to pull some other potential deacons and elders into the conversation. Yeah. And so we have invited other men to join us, and we pray together and we talk about, hey, what it's like to be a deacon, right? And as we move forward into the future, there will be more conversations about what's an elder, there's some training in there. Right now, the deacons are working on pastoral prayers, and because they are actually going to start in the new year being part of the pastoral prayer rotation. Pastoral prayer is not a pastor has to do it, right? It is meant to be some of the leaders of the church speaking truth as they praying on behalf of the church. And I have, an article on it that we've handed out that I don't have before me, but right. So that's one of the ways we've done that. The discipleship groups are another way, and they're very intentional of a go. You kind of have a basis of what it should look like. We had a 45-minute class and saying, hey, here's what it looks like. Go do it. And I think it's funny because I think some of the groups are just different, right? Some of them are going longer than they should, which is okay. Some of them are doing things differently, and they're like, oh, we didn't cover any of these things. Doesn't matter. You dug into the word together, you prayed together. Yeah. Right. That's huge component of discipleship. So what we're doing is we're evaluating all the things we're doing. We're looking forward to what the future is saying. We have a retreat coming up in a few weeks where we're going to spend about probably 12 hours together just praying through and processing the future. Yeah. And those are the things we're doing to say, okay, what is relevant right here and now to our community, the body itself, the neighbors in our area? What should we be doing? And then how does that impact? And that impacts you and I, right? We're constantly having conversations about what Sunday morning looks like and how do we teach worship in the context of Sunday morning. And so really what we're doing is evaluating everything, which I think is a constant. You kind of brought this up of, we're constantly evaluating, are we being led by God? And so that's the questions we're asking, and we're willing, and this is the hard part, right? This is one of the fears of discipleship. We're willing to submit and surrender and say, okay, this isn't working. Yeah. This isn't what God has called us to do. And that's a scary part, but I think it's kind of a beautiful part, and it's hard. Yeah. If your leadership in your church comes and says, hey, this thing that we've been doing for 20 years, we don't think we should do it anymore. It's like, what? It's okay, right? It's okay if it's done in pursuit of what God is calling us to do. And so I think that's where the elders are starting with. We have some other things that we're having conversations about that we're not ready to say, okay, this is the direction. Because, we want to make sure that we're on the path of what God has asked of us. Yeah. And so that's kind of where WCC is going. So.
Yeah. Those questions are always good because sometimes we think we're doing things that produce a certain outcome, and we come to find out it's not producing the outcome that we thought it was producing.
For sure. And there's some natural things in ministry, right? Like, especially like when you have transitions, right? So-and-so did this. And I'm not talking transitions as staff. Yeah. I'm talking transition as you had a ministry leader who came in and was really passionate about whatever. Yeah. It doesn't. I don't want to use an example because I don't want someone to feel like I'm calling out their ministry or something. But like they came in and did this, right? When I was a youth pastor, right, my goal was to walk away and there be like no bumps in the road. Mm. Like I wanted leaders and students to be trained in a way that when I disappeared, the ministry continued to function, right? And what often happens in that case is like someone might come in and say, hey, Pastor Stephen was really, really an advocate for this. He really had a heart for this. No one else does. Yeah. Then that ministry just naturally dies out. That's okay. Yeah. Right? That's totally okay. And so that's part of the process. We have to learn to not be hurt by that. We have to learn to be pruned by God in those moments and say, hey, is this a good thing? Is this something we should pour into again? But yeah, it can be a tough.
Yeah. Well, hopefully, all these kind of questions that we walked through are really helpful for people. Hopefully, if they didn't really know what does it look like to be a disciple, they have a little bit better picture now. Why is it important? And we could probably come up with an unexhaustive list of fears that we could come up with, right? And I think it's always, for me personally, I think we can never, as leaders in the body, stop saying what the direction of where we're going is. We just assume everybody always knows and they're totally on board. The last piece, though, is if we're not involved, how do we walk into this now? Then,
I think humbly. I think that's the first thing you got to do. You got to say, if you're sitting there listening to this and saying, okay, I want to be part of the discipleship at WCC, what do I do? Mm-hmm. I think humility before the Lord is the most important piece. Saying, okay, I don't know what to do. Yeah. I want to be part of this. I'm terrified. I don't have time for this. It drives me crazy. It makes me anxious. That's the first component. God, I don't know how to do any of this. I humbly submit myself to you. In that humility, asking for help. It's totally okay. And I've offered this many times, and a lot of people in our church have taken it up of like, hey, if you have a question about something I taught or something that's going on in the church, you just come call, make a meeting with me. And I've had that, right, where someone said, hey, you said this on Sunday morning. Can you explain it better? Or did you mean to say this or whatever? Those are always welcome questions, and not just to me, right? Our staff and our elders are willing to have those conversations, but there's a humility in saying, I'm going to take time to go and address those. So the big part of the process of discipleship is self. And I don't mean by like making yourself better. That's a worldly perspective. Yeah. It's about surrendering self to Jesus and allowing him to work. So you can't disciple or be a disciple unless you're willing to surrender. And so there's a sacrifice in discipleship that you must make. And so humility and then sacrifice to say, okay, I'm humble enough to say I need to help. I need guidance. I need this. I know this is going to be a sacrifice of my time, my energy, my talents and stuff like that. And then I'm going to go pursue it, right? I'm going to get help pursuing it, or I'm just going to start doing it. Do the Samaritan woman at the well. I'm just going to go talking to people about Jesus, right? We had a couple students who were like, "Hey, we want to do a Bible study. We're just going to do it." I'm like, "That's great. Go ahead." And we're like, there's a apprehensive adult fear of like, well, what if they don't teach the right things? Oh, okay, right? Then we talk about it, right? We use that as a discipleship time.
I know a lot of adults who have not taught the right things.
Right,
so.
like it happens. And it happens, right? I have this way that when I'm running a small group or discipleship or in Sunday school class, like if someone says something that's like not totally right, but isn't necessarily like super wrong, I usually just ignore it.
Sure.
Because otherwise I'm going to be constantly correcting like little tidbits of,
sure,
well, you're almost right. Like, I don't want to do that. I only typically step in that kind of context if it's like blatantly heresy.
Sure.
Like, like one time we were sitting and we were having this great conversation in a small group I was doing. It was on 1 John, which is what our discipleship groups are going through right now. And I remember someone just start talking, and it was late on a Sunday evening and I was tired, and I was kind of listening in and saying, kind of zoned out a little. And there was just, because there's a lot of conversation going on about this, and I kept hearing it and I was like, is he saying what I think he's saying? Young person in their faith, right? Didn't have a lot of, but he kept saying it, and I was like, I think he's saying that Jesus was created. Mm. And I was like, whoa. Like I finally had to stop and say, okay, I think this is a conversation that is being had. Like, let's talk about this, right? So that was a moment of like, I had to step in and do that. But oftentimes I don't do that. I'm like, oh, there's, it's even with my kids, like my kids will say something, if it's not blatantly just like crazy off the mark, like I'll just kind of let them talk it out. Yeah. Like sometimes my kids will correct each other and say, well, no, this is actually, and I'll be like, if it gets too harsh, I'll be like, well, actually you're all wrong. Here's what really that looks like. But that's more out of fun than out of, but it's an opportunity for us to, so there's this fear and trepidation to say, I can't do this. And there's this humility. How do I get involved? I humble myself before the Lord. I realize that I need help. I realize that this is a sacrifice that I need to make. Need, not need. This is a need. Right? And then I go do it. So going and doing it, the first step might be to sit with one of the staff or elders and say, hey, I need discipled on how to be a disciple and how to disciple others. All right, that's a great start, right? I think that's what's really happening in all of our groups right now. Yeah. They're not, those facilitators, not leaders, is part of the process, right? I'm not asking them to lead. I'm asking them to just navigate the conversation and the time together. They are trained from the church for 45 minutes, right? And now they have years of time with Jesus. We just pick random people to facilitate the groups. Yeah. But that's all the training we gave them for this new thing. Yeah. And now we're still having conversations, right? I'm still connecting with them and stuff like that. So, but it's the humility to say, okay, let's go do it. Yeah. And over time we correct and we learn, and we just like Jesus. You teach, you show, you teach, you send, you teach, you send alone, right? That's the willingness, though, becomes this humility to submit and the willingness to sacrifice. And then now you can pursue it. That's how you pursue discipleship.
Yeah, great. Well, thanks for walking us through all these things. we could probably sit here for another couple hours unpacking
Sure.
all these things and even more. But we're also really thankful that whoever's paying attention, if you're listening to the audio or you jumped on YouTube and you're watching the video here, we're so glad that you spent the time to do that. And really just come into this conversation to find out what is discipleship, why is it so important, what are some of the fears that I'm probably carrying with me, and how can I move past those. This is a fresh, I want to say new, but not really new, right? Discipleship is not new. Waushara Community Church has always been doing discipleship.
Yes.
We're just maybe taking a restock and a reorganization so that there's a unity in what everybody's doing here together as a body. And so we hope that you will not be too afraid and you'll step in regardless of what your particular fears are or your concerns. So thanks for joining us on this podcast today. We're going to be pushing out some more podcast specifically about discipleship and some of the other aspects of it. And so if you've watched this and you have more questions, come find us and ask us, or leave them in the comments below, and hopefully we can tackle those in another video. Thanks, everybody, for listening to the Mixing Bowl podcast, discipleship podcast. We hope you have a great week. Bye.
Play sweet elevator music.